Welcome, everybody. So my name is Yvette Hardy. I'm from ASSITEJ South Africa, and we're going to be taking this morning's session, which is on monitoring and evaluation. But we wanted to start off by giving you an opportunity to ask some questions coming out of the workshop that we held on Friday. And we do have our partners in the room, so I'd like to welcome AVA, CDI and Suidoosterfees, as well as the funder of this event, which is the National Arts Council, are, of course, really focused on National Arts Council funding. And we do have Ling from the National Arts Council who will be able to answer some of your questions. So I would like to just first of all find out if there's anybody in the room who would like to ask a question, or perhaps maybe I'll hand it over to Ling for a moment just to say hello to you all, and then you can give it a moment's thought while she's doing that.
Good morning, everyone. For the refresher on Friday, my name is Bulende Sala, and I'm the Arts Development Officer for Visual Arts. I've been with the NAC for 14 years. There was a question on Friday. There were a couple of questions after the presentation of Francois regarding reporting. If I would be given an opportunity to answer, can I ask one of you again to refresh the question? But then again, there's something that stuck in my mind on Friday. There was another suggestion from one of the participants regarding the funding guidelines, and there was a recommendation that we need to have a follow-up fund workshop again to talk about the exclusions. And I thought maybe I should talk about them because it's quite very easy to answer them. Simply because all the exclusions that we have, guys, to be honest, it's got nothing to do with giving you miraculous answers why we're not funding them. They're all based on funding. We don't have enough funds. So if we have exclusions on fashion design, the answer is simple. We don't have funds to support the entire project around fashion. If you see exclusion, it's instruments, know that it's also based on budgetary constraint. We don't have funds. But we started having a different narrative when we had a PSP. We opened the doors of heaven, because then people could, or artists could now request funds for buying equipment, to also host fashion shows, and to start new productions, which is something that we never, under our own funding, we cannot be able to support. So just to cut it very short, to say that follow-up workshop, it may be very difficult for us to even try and resolve it, because we know that the only answer we can give to each and every exclusion is that we don't have money. If we don't fund competition, it's because we don't have money. If we don't fund interior design, it's because we don't have money. If we don't fund industrial design, it's because we don't have funds, enough funds. But I think with having to have several conversations with Treasury to increase our funds, maybe we'll have a different funding guidelines, which may maybe give you guys a bit of a hope to be ambitious about your projects. And I think that's the question that I thought I should have really answered on Friday when it was raised. But another question around reporting, unfortunately, I couldn't recall it. I would really appreciate it if it can be brought back, and then we can answer, and then we can move to the session of today.
Thanks so much, Puling. I'm not sure whether one of my partners can help you with that question. If it was on reporting, it was probably in the Suidoosterfees session. So perhaps, Francois, you remember what the question was. I do see a hand, however, from one of the guests. So maybe we can deal with that while you are remembering what the question was. I'm not sure who this guest is, but there's someone with a hand up.
Hey, good morning, Yvette. Good morning, everyone. It's just Real from Beaufort West here. I would like to ask something, if it's okay.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question, I don't know to who specifically it is, and on Friday I couldn't join in the whole session, so I'm not sure if my question will be irrelevant or will it still be dealt with. But my question is simple. Now, whenever there's a call Like I'm one of the lucky ones and the blessed ones that got funding from the National Art Council in the previous year through my company. So what I would like to ask, now, since I'm from Beaufort West in the Central Karoo, which is a very rural area, and there's a lot of artists and organizations that do not get the information or the call somehow due to information not getting to them, or whatever the challenge might be. But my question is, what is the possibility? I understand that a call is open for the whole South Africa when a call is open, but what is the possibility whenever maybe the National Art Council gives out a call that there can be specific focus, maybe an organization identified with the help of officials from the NAC to assist to make sure a certain percentage to get to rural projects? Because the reason why I'm asking that is because sometimes we go through a lot need to submit. I submit every time, so at least I got one time, and I understand there's not funding for everyone, and every time you do apply, but at least just some kind of a guarantee that rural projects will be supported would be if there's a certain percentage allocated specifically to assist maybe rural projects, because sometimes it's disadvantaging for us to apply with the whole of South Africa coming from a rural area, you see. So that's basically my question: is there a possibility whenever there's a call for funding in the whole call that there's maybe a specific allocation and a certain organization or entity to make sure that rural projects on the ground really do get funded? That is basically my question. Yeah. I don't know if it's relevant or what. Yeah.
No, it is definitely relevant, and it's a very tough question because at this particular moment, there's been internal conversation as to how can we disperse funds. If you can look at how we've been funding for the past 2 years, our focus was mainly on disadvantaged provinces to start with. In your province, it's actually regarded as an advantaged province. But things are starting to change because we have a representation from your province who stated as well that we need to channel some of the funds to disadvantaged areas, which is rural areas and peri-urban areas. And we have divided, we're going to approach the funding with 40%, which is going to be divided. But unfortunately, at this particular moment, it's not finalized. But just to answer your question, we are definitely in conversation to make sure that the rural areas, whether it's from an advantaged province or disadvantaged province, there is funds that is allocated to those areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Jezreel, for the question. Francois, I don't know whether you're able to help Puleng with the question that was being asked about reporting on Friday that you would like to follow up on.
Yes, Yvette, I have looked in the previous chat of last week. So the questions are, the one question from Hedwig Puleng is, what happens if you underspend on a line item? Would the NAC usually be okay with the organization to spend it on another line item when one has an eligible reason? Then the other one that is actually related to that question is, when in the project cycle does one communicate with the NAC about this change in spending?
Okay. One, the first question, definitely NAC can look into accepting those kind of changes where you've underspent and you've moved the money to another item. But however, it's important that you also communicate that in your report as well, to say there is a bit of a change in terms of money. I didn't use it for a project manager, I used it for a particular item. And it's stated very clearly so that you and the official responsible for that project, you both agree. The communication between changes, it has, I don't know if most of people, I think, in this group, I've seen their names, they've received funding before. You will see that before we release the contract, you will have to give us an action plan and a budget, which will state how you're going to use the money. But if around the time when you are starting now to use the money and you realize that for transportation now you're spending less, you rather use the money for something else, you just write an email to an official, you both agree. The only thing is when you keep quiet and then when verifying department is looking at the application and at the reporting and the invoices, they see the differences, then they start communicating, then the official is not aware of that. There isn't any communication. So it's important that a beneficiary and an official have a constant communication. If there are any changes arises, they let them know. And then we both agree. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. It can only just be an email, even an SMS, it's fine. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pulang. I don't know if there are any other questions from the floor before we dive into today's session on monitoring and evaluation. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question coming out of what happened last week? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to take that as a sign that we can move into our monitoring and evaluation session. So really what we're talking about today is monitoring, evaluation, and how that contributes to learning, to organizational learning for growth and sustainability. And of course, monitoring and evaluation is, in our view at ASSITEJ, absolutely integral to everything that we do, both as an organization and in every project that we embark on. So while this is in a way almost above and beyond the topics that we were asked to present by the National Arts Council, we feel it's absolutely integral, and it is very much a part of both of the two things that we did on Friday. So on Friday we spoke about writing a proposal, and we also spoke about writing the report. And of course, in the proposal, we're going to be indicating what our monitoring and evaluation plan is for the project that we are putting forward. And in our report, we're going to be reporting back on that monitoring and evaluation plan. So you'll see a lot of linkages and crossovers from what we were discussing on Friday. So what is monitoring and evaluation exactly? As a process, it's something in which it's a process in which we understand the projects that we're doing in terms of their performance. Have they been able to reach the goals that we've set? How can those programs be improved? And you can see from the little graphic on the side that monitoring and evaluation, while there may be some sort of core planning features, we also need to remain flexible. We need to be continuously reviewing and seeking feedback and sharing our learning. So it's not something which is set in stone right at the beginning and never changes. It's something that does grow both with your organization and with a project. Now, we use this term, monitoring and evaluation, together very often, but obviously they are two different things. So I want to stop here for a moment and just ask you, what is the difference between monitoring and evaluation? What are those two different elements? Does anybody want to suggest an answer? I've got Lucanio in the room here, and he looks like he's he's thinking about an answer. Do you want to come over here, just a bit close to my computer, so that you can maybe offer an answer here, Lucanio? Yeah, come closer. Yeah, what do you think it is?
I think that monitoring, it's something that you do on a daily basis in your organization. You monitor the performance, and then evaluation is more like is more of, I don't know how to put it. You are evaluating. You want to know how far did the project go, what went wrong, or you know what worked and what didn't work. So you are evaluating so that you can improve. Yeah.
Excellent, absolutely. You should be giving this workshop. So yes, exactly. So monitoring is really that process of collecting the data. It's a systematic process, and it's ongoing. And it often starts even before a project starts. So it's about finding out, everything that we need to know ahead of starting a project, and then monitoring through the course of the project in order to track the progress. How far are we towards reaching our objectives? And also to guide project management decisions. So for example, we may decide that something is not working in its current form. I mean, we saw many examples of this during COVID. We needed to run a workshop. We needed to have 25 people at the workshop, but perhaps they were not able to attend in person. So we've got to adjust. How do we adjust? So the moment we pick up through our monitoring that something is not working in the usual way, then we are able to make those changes. So monitoring also focuses on the processes. So what is happening? When is it happening? Where is it happening? Who's delivering it? How is it being delivered? How many people or how many entities are being reached, right? It's all the data, basically, that's being collected through the course of the program. And it can, as I said, be conducted before the project begins. So that's what we call a baseline assessment, where we are basically saying, for example, let's imagine we were taking a program into a school, and we wanted to know, has the school ever experienced anything like this before? Have they been involved with the arts before? We might do a baseline assessment to assess that first, so that we're then able to measure more clearly the change that occurs because of the program that we're going to be doing. So that's monitoring. And then evaluation, as Lucanio said, is about assessing all of that, right? It's about assessing the design, the implementation, the results. It's about really sort of trying to put it all together in the end. And we're doing this in order to learn from everything that we have gathered, and in order to be strategic, to make the right kinds of strategic decisions. So we're not just doing this in order to report to the National Arts Council. And I think this is one of the most important things that we really want to get across in this session today, is that monitoring and evaluation shouldn't be something that you're just doing for your funder. Monitoring and evaluation should be something that you are doing every day because you believe in your organization and you want your organization to improve, on a continual basis. And you believe in your projects and you want to make sure that your projects are meeting their targets. So it really is very, very much a part of how you manage your programs and you manage your organization. And evaluation can be quite broad. So it will include looking at things like, how relevant is this program? How accessible is it? Do the people who are involved, do they understand it? Is it comprehensive? Is it covering everything that it needs to cover? Is it integrated into their lives? Or do we need to find another way to do the program that would be better integrated? Is it fulfilling the objectives? How effective is it? What about the cost of the program? Is it too costly? Or in fact, do we feel that we need to be getting more money for this program to really make it effective? Because right now, it's not having its impact. How efficient is it? How sustainable is it? So those are all the kinds of questions that we're asking when we're looking at evaluation. And evaluation is methodical. So it is something where we're taking all the information and we're wanting to put it together in a way that makes real sense, so that we can both understand it as an organization and so that we can relay it in a way to our boards, to our funders, to our partners, to anybody who's needing to take a decision about our programs. So I hope that that's clear in terms of monitoring and evaluation. And here's a little bit more about evaluation. So evaluation can be conducted for the purposes of decision-making, judgments, conclusions, findings, new knowledge, organizational development, capacity building. So, we may discover in the course of a program that actually we need to have trained our own staff better to really run this program the way we would like to see it running. And then when we come back to the program, we'll be looking at how can we build capacity first before, repeating what we did before. And it's in response to the needs of identified stakeholders. So this is really important as well, is that evaluation is also always linked to that social benefit that we are trying to reach, to the goals of our project. And hopefully it will lead to improvement and to making decisions about the future and to being accountable. And ultimately, it's going to inform our social action. So we'll go into all of these details a little bit more as we go through the session today. But I hope that gives you just a picture of what evaluation is. As we are evaluating, we also tend to start to identify relevant standards, right? So what is the standard, for example, for an artists in schools program? You know, what should be a basic standard in relation to that? If an artists in schools program is not in any way aware of the curriculum that is happening in the schools, is it a good artists in schools program? So part of evaluation is also about starting to identify relevant standards, then starting to investigate how we can perform better against those standards, and then hopefully integrating all of that into the way that we improve our projects. And something that I feel very passionately about, and perhaps this is a part of you know, the kind of DNA of ASSITEJ, is that monitoring and evaluation can really be collaborative. And it should be collaborative, in my view. And I think that it's something that in South Africa we could really learn to do better, is how do we, as all the stakeholders working within the sector, work together to start to identify what those standards are? And how do we support one another to make sure that those standards are being met, right? ASSITEJ is a network of organizations. We are a network of members. We have individual members, we have small companies, we have community theatre organizations that are members of ASSITEJ, we have big theatres that are members of ASSITEJ, like Artscape or The Market. We've got big organizations like Sabikwa, etc., who are all members of ASSITEJ. They're all doing similar work. And one of the things that we've been trying to do over the years is to try and find ways to provide kind of frameworks that everybody can use, you know. So how, instead of people identifying a tool by themselves and then working entirely in their own space, how can we help people to use these tools across the board? So we can start to get a bigger picture of what's happening in our case in terms of the performing arts and arts access for children and young people. I also think this is quite an interesting slide. There's a very strong connection between evaluation and research. And in fact, there are different views as to how these two things connect. So what this slide is showing you is some of those views. So some people, like in slide A, think that research and evaluation is actually the same thing. I don't believe that. I'll tell you where I sit in a moment. Other people say evaluation is kind of on a continuum to research. So they're sort of the same thing, but you know, they're sort of a longer continuum. We need additional things in order to call it proper research. Other people will say evaluation is actually a part of research, right? And then you can see in slide D, and this is kind of where I sit, I think, is that research and evaluation are somewhat different, but they have a lot of overlaps. I'll give you an example. With evaluation, we are, as an organization, are deciding what it is that we want to evaluate. Sometimes our funders are deciding for us what it is that we need to evaluate, right? So some funders will give you funding on the basis that you reach a particular objective, okay? Now that's different from research. Research is always independent. It's not informed by the people who are actually doing the work. I mean, it is informed by them, but it's not driven by them, and it's certainly not driven by the funders. Generally speaking, what you want research to be is something which is objective, which is standing outside the organization, looking in, you know, looking at the program. So that would be one example of how they intersect. They use similar methodologies, but they might be different. They're serving different purposes. Research tends to be widely shared, or one hopes it is widely shared, right? So research is done, for example, by the South African, by SACO. They are our research body for the arts in South Africa. When they've done a research project, they host a seminar where everybody gets to hear that research in the industry. Monitoring and evaluation tends to be way more internal. And this is where I think that we actually could be braver, we could be sharing more, because we can learn from one another in terms of our monitoring and evaluation. But monitoring and evaluation tends to be something which we keep to ourselves, which we just look at within our organization. We go, oh, we succeeded there, we failed there, you know, and we'll improve our project in this way. So there are overlaps, but I don't see them as exactly the same thing. All right, so we're going to shift gears now because I'm going to introduce you to our operations manager, Ntateng Mhlambiso, who's sitting in our Joburg office, which is at the Windy Brow Art Centre. And she's going to be taking you through the next part of our presentation. And I'll be back towards the end. So Ntateng, over to you. And you just tell me when I need to move the slides along.
Thank you, Yvette. I hope I can be heard clearly. Okay, so thank you for that first part, Yvette, and I am going to just move into systematizing the M&E in the organization. So for most of the organizations that I've worked for in my life, M&E, just like communications, would be something that is done by the way. So it's not something that organizations really formalize and make sure that they have like staff that is dedicated to doing the monitoring and evaluation. And it's quite understandable for small organizations that most people end up doing everything. So M&E communication would be those things that are done, by the way, on the side, only when the donor requires that the M&E is done. So what I'm going to do with presentation, it's talking about how we can systematize our M&E. So what I want to talk about is, and I'm happy that Yvette on the last slide spoke about research. So this is how you systematize your M&E in the organization. So first of all, before you even do your strategic planning, you start by doing research. So this is what donors usually call evidence-based programming. So they will say, if you're saying you will require funds to do this kind of work, what evidence do you have that this is really a problem? And what evidence do you have that your plan is the best way to address this problem? So, so you start with doing that kind of research so that when you present to the donor, you're saying, I've got this research, I've spoken to people, I've seen this, and this is the problem, and this is the best way that we can address it. So that's where your strategic planning comes. You are doing a strategy to say, this is how we're going to address this problem, and this is the best way that we're going to do that. So usually strategic planning is done every 5 years by the organization. So in most cases, yes, it's about what you are going to do to address the problem, but also you need to think about the social benefit. What is the social benefit? So it's not really just about, I'm going to reach 1 million children in South Africa. The question would be, so what? So what happens after you have done that program? So that's what we call impact. So your strategic planning really needs to show what kind of impact are you going to do to the community. I'm getting a bit of feedback. I'm not sure if can we mute ourselves. Okay. And then once you've done a strategic planning, that's when you go and do your annual program planning. So you have a strategic plan that you will run for 5 years, and you know what you want to see by the end of the 5 years. But each year, sometimes it will be your financial year, but sometimes it is your calendar year. You need to say, this is what we're going to do towards that the strategic goals. So you do your annual program planning, which will result into like a proper work plan for the organization to say, this year, this is what we want to achieve. And then you do your budgeting. And when you do your budgeting, this is when you start to see whether or not you have enough funds for all the programs that you are running. You identify the funding gap, and which will then inform whoever is doing resource mobilization or fundraising to say, this is how much you require, please go and do your resource mobilization. Once you've done your annual program planning or your budgets, and you know what you need to do in this current year, you then do your monitoring and evaluation plan, you do your communication plan, you do your risk planning, that I may have planned this, but what if it doesn't happen? For example, Corona comes in, what happens? So you need to already have those things thought about way before you even start implementing your program. You also need to do sustainability planning. And sustainability planning is really about mostly funding, make sure that you have funds. If the donor comes to an end, a certain grant comes to an end, you need to know what are you going to do to pick up from where it has ended. And this is also something that goes and informs whoever is doing resource mobilization to say, we need to be fundraising. Okay, sorry, I'm told that I can't be heard properly. So is it better now? Can you hear me better? I've tried to come closer to the computer as possible.
Yeah, it sounds a bit better now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So I'm not sure where you started not hearing me, but I just want to repeat that last part where I said that once you've done your annual programming and budgeting for the year, you then do your planning for monitoring and evaluation, you do your communications plan, you do your risk planning, you also do your sustainability planning. Once those things are in place, then you can go and implement your program. And while you're implementing your programming, alongside that, you're doing M&E, you're monitoring whether it is working well or whatever. You're also doing your communication to make sure that the donors know what you're up to, your staff knows what is happening, your partners, your stakeholders, the people that you're working with. So communication is something that happens all the time. And while you're doing your communications, you're also doing public relations, because at the end of the day, we want to do the work. While you're doing the work, we also need to be talking to the public to say, this is what we're doing. And that kind of public relations is the one that would sometimes even attract your donors to say, this is a good project, I would want to invest. This is what will also inform your partners to say, I would like to be associated with that project. Let me see if I can contact ASSITEJ and become part of the program. So that's the kind of PR. But also at the same time, you'll be doing information management. So this information that you're monitoring and seeing every day, you're also keeping that information in such a way that it can be retrieved. It is it is backed up. You can get it anytime you want to find it. So usually there's a traditional way of monitoring where we're using like pieces of papers, you go with questionnaires and those things. When you come back to the office, you put them somewhere, you do not know where they are. So now that we are like, usually, like for example, I think Yvette will show you the kinds of tools that we are using for M&E. So most of the things now are online. So it is very easy to keep that kind of information safe, and it is very easy to find it when you need it, unlike like a piece of paper that you put somewhere in the cupboard and then you forget about it afterwards. So while you're doing your program implementation, you'll be doing your monitoring, and then you'll be doing your evaluation and learning. So evaluation and learning, it's usually done halfway through the project and towards the end of the project. So while you are halfway through the project that you're doing, you're evaluating to see whether this is working the way it was planned. Is this the correct design? Is this project still relevant to the people that you are giving it to? Is it making any change at all? Because sometimes you can do something with an anticipated change, but halfway down the line, you realize that you are not getting what you were looking for. And that's when evaluation is important. Then you know, maybe we need to change strategy, maybe we need to do things differently. So after you've done your evaluation, or evaluation is also continuous because you keep evaluating every time you implement. So you know that there will be reporting. So reporting is usually for donors. So the contract of the donor will tell you, at this point, you need to give us a midterm report. At this point, you need to give us a final report. And reporting, obviously, it's going to be your narrative, it's going to be your financial reporting. So that is usually, so reporting also can happen at different intervals. So for example, for you to be able to report to the donor, you need to be reporting inside the organization as well. So your staff, once they've implemented, usually people, you have your monthly reports from staff, or sometimes quarterly reports from staff. So those are the reports, that data that is on those reports is the information that you can use to populate your donor report. So reporting happens at different intervals. So there will be donor reporting, there will be internal reporting, but also I know for ASSITEJ, we are required by the Department of Social Development to do compliance reports every financial year. So there's also that kind of reporting. And usually donors will give you a template to fill. And some donors will say, just tell us what you've done. So some donors don't have like templates. But I know for sure that with the Department of Social Development, there's a template that you need to fill just to say what you've been up to in the previous financial year. So, and then once you've done this reporting and once you've done your evaluation, there are things that you find out. You realize that, okay, it looks like the project didn't go so well because of certain things. So for example, you realize, I think Yvette said earlier on, that you realize that your staff needs to be developed in order to be able to do certain kinds of work. So that's where your capacity development will come in to say, okay, we realize that we need to do training for staff to make sure that they are best skilled to deliver the program. And then with capacity development, there's also that after you've done your program and you see that it's really worked well, that's when you want to do a scale up. So for example, you realize that some projects will start maybe in 3 provinces. And if things have worked very well, you'll be like, okay, maybe now we need to go to 5 provinces, and maybe now we need to do the entire 9 provinces. So that's what happens after evaluation, because you get to see whether things have worked well or not. When they did not work well, you address the problem through capacity development, trainings, etc. Where they've gone well, that's when you can say maybe we need to scale up this program. And of course, program scaling up also requires funds. So if you decide to do a program scale up, you need to be able to know that you have funds that will make sure that the program grows. So this is more like a cycle. As you can see, after the program scale up, you are going back to your strategic planning, because you've monitored, you've seen things are working well, you've seen things that didn't work well, you go back to the strategic planning. So usually the strategic planning will be done in every 5 years, but there are times when the donor would be like, can you give us a mid-term review of your project? So every 2.5 years, you might have to do like a re-strategizing, rethinking, reporting, etc., etc. So that's I will end on that slide and see if there are any questions, or if I can move on. Any questions? No. Okay, so now we're going to go to the key elements of a good M&E system. So I'm going to ask if anyone has any idea of what makes a very good monitoring and evaluation system. Anyone? No. Okay, let's move that to the next slide. Sorry? Sorry? Someone said start with the outcomes. Yes, perfect. That's actually a good idea, because most donors lately are interested in what is called results-based monitoring and evaluation. So you start with the outcomes, you start with the results, you start by thinking, what is it exactly that I want to achieve by this program? So I'm going to go to the key element of an effective M&E system. So first of all, when you're systematizing your M&E system, you need to have a theory of change. So I will, in the next slide, I will show you an example of a theory of change, but this is really just a way that shows that this is the vision, this is our mission, and this is how we think we can best address the challenge that we're seeing. So usually a theory of change can be in a narrative form, which is in the form of a strategic plan, but also it can be on a diagram form. So I'll show you in the next slide what it looks like. You also need a results framework. So I spoke about results-based monitoring and evaluation. So results framework looks at the outcomes. You start by thinking, what do I want to change? From whom do I want to see the change? How am I going to see that change? So that's a results framework. I'm also going to show you an example. Then you need to have an M&E plan. An M&E plan is really just to say, what kind of data will I be collecting as I am implementing my program? So that kind of data, who is going to collect it? How are you going to collect it? What tools are you going to use to collect that data? When that data has been collected, what are you going to do with it? Who is going to analyze it, evaluate it, so that you've got like conclusions about whether the project worked well or not. You also need to have donor annual and midterm reports. You also need to do reflections and re-strategizing. So I know with most organizations, towards the end of the year or the financial year, there's what they call reflections, where you sit as staff and become objective about whether or not things worked well, so that it will inform how you re-strategize. Can move to the next slide, Yvette. So I spoke about the theory of change. So it's a description of really why a particular way of working will be effective. It shows how change happens in the short, medium, and long term to achieve the intended impact. So as I said, it can be represented in a diagram, it can be represented as a narrative, or both even. So this is sort of an example, and it's really just a work in progress, but this is an example of what a theory of change would look like. So first of all, you want to look at the vision. So you want to reach that big vision, and then you look at the mission. So the vision will be the what do you want to see changing in the world, and then the mission will be how are we going to make that change. So this is how it looks like. And then what you need to do also, you need to think about the stakeholders from whom you want to see change, and be very specific and clear about those. So, for example, with the work that ASSITEJ does, we know that we're working with artists, we know we're working with teachers, with learners, schools, members, artists, and donors. So for all of those, they call them target audiences or beneficiaries, or they call them actors. For all of those actors, there's a change that we want to see when we're implementing our program. That's why we have then outcomes for each of those actors to say, this is what we want to see changing from these people at a specific time. So for example, if you give like yourself 5 years of your strategic plan, we want to see this change happening in those actors. Then you are going now to talk about how are you going to do that work with those? Are you going to get to that outcome of each of those actors? That's when, for example, with ASSITEJ, we have 4 pillars. We know we want to develop and support artists. We want to empower education. We want to advocate and connect, and we want to create access to arts. So those are the key elements that are going to help us reach the outcomes that we gave for each of our target audiences. I hope we are still together. So the nice thing about a theory of change that is in a diagram form like this is that, say, for example, a donor wants to know what you are doing. Just looking at this snapshot, it's very easy to connect the dots and see what you are doing, instead of going through an entire strategic plan document would be like 50 pages. So going through that entire thing can be daunting for some people, unless they are really dedicated. But a nice thing about a theory of change is that it's a snapshot like this, but it can give you everything you want to know about the organization. So now we're going to go to a results framework. And I did say that a results framework is a planning and a communications, it's a planning, communications, and management tool that emphasizes on results to provide clarity around key project objectives. So it's the same as a logical framework. I think we spoke about that on Friday. It's the same as a logical framework, because it sort of gives you like a logical way of how things are going to happen to reach an intended outcome. Can we move to the next slide, Yvette? So this is an example of a results framework. As you can see, I told you that we have 4 pillars as ASSITEJ, and this is one of them: develop and support artists. So you want your work to be always looking at the bigger picture, so that you do not lose track of the work that you're doing. So that's why it's important to always remember that, okay, we said we're going to develop and support artists. So how are we going to do that? So what are we going to do to develop and support artists? So you can see here, we said we're gonna develop and support artists, facilitators, and us administrators to ensure national reach, provide. So this is the what are we going to do to get to this outcome of the pillar. And then you go to activities. How are you going to do that? That's when you break down your activities that we're going to do trainings in the 9 provinces, we're going to have workshops, we're going to do whatever. So that will be your activities that explains exactly how you're going to reach that goal. And then the time frames, it is quite self-explanatory. It's about when are you going to be able to do that. And when you're doing your time frames, it's also looking at your staff capacity. It's also looking at the context in the specific place that you're operating at. But you're also looking at grant cycles. So for example, donors will give you a full amount, sometimes upfront, but sometimes donors will give you money in tranches. So when you're doing your time frames, you need to be thinking tranches, when will be the money coming in, when will we need to report, etc., etc. So the time frames are like that, and also they can be changed as and when needed, because you'll be also just looking at the context, when can things happen. So for example, you know that there's work that you want to do when schools are closed, there's work that you want to do when schools are open. So that determines your time frames. And then this is the outcome. So once you've done all of that, you know you have an outcome. What do you want to see after you've done all of this work? So the outcome will be there. And then with that outcome, you also need to know what are the indicators that are showing that I'm working towards, I'm still on track towards the outcomes. So the indicators are just like little milestones that are getting towards the outcome. So you need to have those very clear as well, so that you can see that you're still on track to get to your outcomes. I will stop there for now and see if there are any questions. No. Okay. Can we move to the next slide, Yvette, so that I can speak about the monitoring and evaluation plan as we see it? Presentation was clear. Okay, thank you. Yvette, can you move to the next slide, which is like an example of a monitoring and evaluation plan?
Hi, Enterteng. It is on that slide. It's showing on our side as being on that slide. Is no one else seeing it?
No. I am seeing, yes, I'm on that. I'm seeing the monitoring and evaluation explanation, but the following slide is the actual example of a monitoring and evaluation plan.
Okay, so the next one along is this one? No?
No?
No, we've just got, that's all I've got.
Yes, that's the one. The one that you just showed now with a table. Yes. No. No. That's the one, yes. The Kickstarter one. Also, it's not showing on my screen, but it's showing on your side. Ah, okay. So there's the one that has got the Kickstarter monitoring and evaluation plan, Yvette. It's on a table.
So I'm using the slides you sent back to me. Oh, it's here. All right, so it's a couple of slides on. Here we go.
Okay. Yes, there we go. So this is like an example of what a monitoring and evaluation plan looks like. And the most difficult thing about M&E templates is that they look so, they can look so so intimidating because of all of this little information that you're seeing there. But really, if you apply your mind, it's not that complicated. You'll see that the M&E plan will still look at your results, your impact, your outcomes. You still have to have that bigger picture on the side. But it speaks about, but your plan looks at the results, but then it shows the indicators, what will make me see that I am working towards that outcome or that result or that impact. So those will be your indicators to say, if we want to make sure that schools are entrenched with creative arts program, the progress markers or indicators will be the number of artist facilitators that we have trained, the number of teachers we have trained. And so those are like little milestones that you are seeing, that you are looking at to track whether you're still on track with the results that you are aiming to achieve. And then when you're doing a monitoring and evaluation plan, this is what we spoke about, what information will be collected. So you'll be saying that as we are implementing this project, we'll be collecting this data. And this is the information that we'll be collecting. How will it be collected? You'll be using your tools. It's either you do it as online surveys, in-person conversations. It could be your photography, your videos, but that's like really the tools that you're going to use to collect the data. And then the next thing is when I'm going to do that, which is like time frames. And then you need to also be clear about who collects the information. So if you're working with schools, you might need at some point that teachers collect information from learners. You might need the artists who are training teachers to be collecting information from the teachers. And then if you are the artists themselves who are doing the trainings, as ASSITEJ, you might be wanting to collect that information from the artists. So there are different sources of data, and you need to be very clear about who's going to collect that information at what intervals. And then once that data is collected, you also need to know who is going to analyze it. So analyzing it, it's really more like evaluation. You'll be looking at whether things are going as planned. Are we seeing results that we had planned? Or are there any changes that need to be made? And then that will inform whether you re-strategize the way you're doing the work or if you continue to do it as it is. Thank you. So, and then we spoke about reporting. Obviously, reporting, I spoke about the quarterly staff reports. Sometimes people do monthly reports, sometimes they do quarterly reports. You also need to do your donor reports, you need to do your annual reports, you need to do your compliance reports to the department. And then we spoke about reviewing and replanning. So that one, you can do it halfway through the project. You can do it after the end of the project. You can do it annually. So it's really just sitting down and being objective and thinking clearly, what have we done? Are we progressing the way we wanted to? etc., etc. So that's like the end of the M&E part. However, reporting is not really the end of monitoring and evaluation, because once you have done reporting, you still need to continue doing your work. You still need to be continuing to do your M&E. So it's more like a cycle, really, in planning. So now, just going to run through a few more slides about developing and implementing the M&E plan. We spoke about the goal. You need to know what is the goal, what are we trying to achieve, and be very clear about that. We need to be clear about the goals, short-term and long-term outcomes that we want to see. And you need to think about your various stakeholders. So we spoke about the different actors or beneficiaries. So those different stakeholders, you need to know, be clear about the goals and outcomes that you're looking for each of those stakeholders. And then you need to just ensure that these outcomes, etc., are in line with the goals of the donors that you're approaching. So for example, the NAC, so the NCE critical focus areas. If you go to the National Arts Council website, there's a criteria that they've put up for the things that they are funding and the kind of things that they, like the kind of values or things, how they evaluate your proposals. So you need to be very clear about those things and ensure that the work that you're doing is in line with such goals. It may be a different funder, but you must always make sure that your goals speak to those goals of the funder as well. So when you implement your M&E system, you need to break down the M&E data that will be collected at various intervals. If you remember the table that I showed you, we said be very clear about what kind of information is going to be collected, from where, how, and by who, at what different intervals. You also need to list the M&E techniques to use for monitoring. So, for example, I know that there are people, when they're monitoring their work, they would do like field visits to go on the ground and see when people are implementing, when your staff are implementing work. You do field visits and then you want to see them real time as they implement. Sometimes you want to do interviews with people that were part of the program. Sometimes you ask people to self-assess themselves, to say, before you became part of this program, how did you feel? And now that you've been part of this program, how do you feel? Do you feel like there's been a change in your skills or capacity, etc.? And sometimes you want to just use your own observation, just looking at things. And sometimes you need to do third-party validation. This is where you'll be asking someone else about the other person to say, do you think you are seeing change on this person? You also need to identify the tools that you're going to use. We spoke about online surveys. We spoke about hard copy questionnaires, which I do not like anymore because they can easily be lost. We spoke about, and sometimes statistics, just looking out when the statistics come out to see what is happening in the world and how does that impact on your program. Sometimes you want to do interviews with people. Sometimes we do focus groups, discussions, and sometimes we do case studies. So usually when a program has been done, you always want to get like, they call them success stories. So, or stories of impact. So you might want to follow just one person who was part of the program and just do a very clear story of from where to what. So it's showing how the project has helped that person from one place to the other. So that's what they call case studies. And then also need to define a timeline. This is being able to say, this needs to be done at this time, and be clear about who's going to do it, how, and where. We spoke about clarifying roles and responsibilities. Who's going to be monitoring, who's going to be collecting the data, who's going to be keeping it, who's going to be analyzing it. Then there's checking real-time data. And when I spoke about real-time data, it's when you be really on the field and seeing as things happen and you are there. So you are seeing things as they happen in that time, in that particular moment. And also you need to make adjustments to your M&E plan when you see that things need to change or things are not working as well as you had planned them to be done. So that's when you do adjustments. And then now really just rinse and repeat. Once you've done your M&E plan and you've seen that it has worked well, or if it didn't work well, this is where you are fixing the little things that did not work well, and then you are going to use it as a continuous plan for different projects. So obviously, every time you're learning something new, you are changing your plan just to make sure that it speaks to the actual work, that things that are happening on the ground. And then this will be, okay, I think my second last slide. So best practices of M&E is establishing a learning culture in organization. So it's not really just doing reporting or M&E to satisfy the donor, but it's to be a consistently learning organization. So you need to have that culture in an organization. We need to adapt to expectations. When we do plans, or sometimes when we do proposals to donors, we become very ambitious and we want to show that we want to do and these big things. Sometimes we realize that we're being very ambitious. So you need to be able to adapt to expectations. So you can come up with this big plan, but once you start implementing, you realize, maybe this is not going to work like this. Then you need to adapt your expectations. You need to also refine your approach to M&E. So, for example, the kind of data that you are looking, you need to be asking very focused questions that will give you the answers that will be useful for you to learn. So your approach needs to be very clear. It needs to be focused questions. So you do not want to be left with a lot of information that you don't even know how to use. So the clearer you are, focused you are about the question that you're asking, the better the data you will receive. Multiple M&E methods. You need to break down your M&E process into smaller processes. So, for example, as we did with that example that I made, you make smaller processes, as in, what are we going to do? For now, we need to develop tools. For now, we need to go and ask people questions. At this point, we need to go and do field visits. So you need to have smaller processes that you know that they can be achieved, and you can see that you are doing well with your plan. Participatory M&E. So monitoring and evaluation needs to be participatory. So it cannot only be your own observation. You need to ask stakeholders, different people, questions. So you may be seeing things all rosy, and whereas the other person is seeing differences, or they're seeing things that are not working well and whatever. So that's why you need to be very participatory and talk to different stakeholders to get different views of the project. Consistency. So really, this one is really just being consistent about the work that you do. Just make sure that when you have made a plan, you stick to the plan, unless otherwise there's something that is beyond your power that will need you to change your plan. Thank you. So I'm going to end here about what M&E is and what M&E is not. This will be my last slide. So we spoke, M&E helps organizations to have better transparency and accountability to your members, to your partners, to your constituencies, to your donor. It helps your organization catch problems early so that you do not finish the problem, then you realize things did not go well throughout this project, but no one saw it. So when you do continuous M&E, you're catching problems as they come early, and you're able to mitigate them in time. It helps the organization to ensure resources are used efficiently. You also learn from your mistakes when you do M&E, because you can see where you went wrong and you know how to rectify going forward. It helps the organization improve decision making. Once you've evaluated, you will know, maybe this is how we should be doing things, not this way. So that helps decision making. It also helps the organization to replicate best projects and programs. This is where I spoke about scaling up. When you see that the program has worked well, then you can replicate somewhere, or you can scale up somewhere. Yes. And then it helps you embrace diversity of thought. I spoke about consulting multiple stakeholders when you're doing your monitoring and when you're doing your evaluation, so that you can get objective information about how your program has been working. And then obviously every organization benefits from M&E. What M&E is not is that it is not a performance management tool. So most of the people would really not like M&E that much, because when you ask, what have you done? What can you show me that you have done this? Do you have images? Do you have anything? People feel like you are monitoring their performance rather than you collecting data to ensure that you're able to report, you're able to learn, etc., etc. So it's not a performance management tool. It is not a policing tool. It's not like you're following around someone, making sure to see whether they are working or not. No, we just want to make sure that the plan that we've made has been implemented and it's being implemented the correct way. Also, it is not additional work to program work. So people be like, oh my God, after doing all this work, now I need to go and do M&E. No, it happens alongside the work. So it's not additional work to the work that you're doing. And also, it is not something that you just do to satisfy the donor. M&E is not a one-person work. Even if a big organization will have their own dedicated M&E people, but that person alone cannot do M&E by themselves. So they need to be connected to the project staff. They need to be talking to stakeholders, etc., etc. And it is not meant to take over program work. So by all means, when you do your M&E plan, it needs to be as simple and as easy as possible for it to be done easily. So you do not want to do something that will make sure that someone sits the entire week doing just M&E without doing the work. So it needs to be happening alongside. Also, M&E is not hard if you just applying a clear mind. Well, I realize that most people are really, they do not like log frames and tables, etc., etc. It looks very complicated when you just look at it. But once you apply your mind and get to understand what it is, you'll realize that it is not really that hard. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ntuteng. Thanks so much for that overview. Let's take a pause now and just see whether there are any questions or comments coming out of what Ntuteng has been explaining. She's really given you a very kind of strong overview of the whole monitoring and evaluation process. And in a moment, we're going to get into more sort of concrete details where we can see how we can use these in the arts. And I'm going to give you some real life ASSITEJ South Africa examples so that you can see the types of tools that we use. But does anyone have any questions or comments? I see Masiklole in the room here is wanting to say something. So Masiklole, just come and speak here because it's on my computer that the sound is operating.
It's better this side.
Yes, it's better this side. Okay,
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, I think you should be heard.
So you've mentioned the qualitative and quantitative form of collecting data. I was wondering is there any model that works with two that will make things easier? Because when it comes to quantitative model, it becomes easy to be fabricated, you know, it can be signed by anyone. And then with the quantitative one, it can take a lot of time than required, you know, but it gives that extensive, that extensive way of reporting. Is there any model that's in between that would go half to make one good method of reporting?
So when you are doing your monitoring and evaluation, and yeah, thank you for raising that. When you're doing your monitoring and evaluation, there is some qualitative information that you require, which is very important because that's the one that tells you whether the program is working well or not. But then there's also the quantitative, which is where you're looking at your numbers. And this comes with this starts from your planning. So when you're doing your planning, you need to be very clear about the numbers. How many students do you want to reach? How many people do you want to reach? So it's really just balancing the two. You need to be looking at your numbers. You need to also be looking at the outcomes that you're doing. So with the example that I showed you, it's just that it showed only the quantitative. But if you see the entire document, there's also a quantitative part on it. So I just mixed those two in one. But yeah, Yvette, you can answer if there's anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we're actually going to go into that now a little bit so we can explore that question a bit further. But before we do that, are there any other questions from anybody in the room? Okay, so then moving on to precisely what Masiklole has just been speaking to, which is quantitative and qualitative. We hear these words all the time, but what exactly are we talking about? So quantitative is literally what can we measure objectively? What can we count? So it's answering questions like how many people, how much money, how often are the workshops? It's that kind of information that we are getting through quantitative. And it can be used, we can make that quantitative assessment using an instrument, generally speaking, like we can use a calculator or a ruler or and when we analyze it, we might be able to analyze it using statistics, right? And so examples of quantitative might be our expenditure or the income or the age of the participants, or the numbers of attendees, or the distance that is being traveled in a project, or demographic information of different kinds. And in terms of what you were saying about, the fact that it can be, that people can lie about their numbers, basically. I think what's really important is that, obviously, firstly, you want to be an organization that is trustworthy and that provides authentic data. So, it is really important that you're not being misleading with the numbers that you present. There are some ways that one can check one's numbers. I mean, for example, we found when we are dealing with audience numbers, some of the events that we do are ticketed, and then it's easy. If you've got tickets, you know exactly how many tickets have gone out, so you're able to count those tickets. But if you're dealing with an event that is free, how do you deal with that? There are a couple of different options. One option would be to take photographs and then literally count afterwards. You can do that. You can also count through, have somebody at the door who's counting as people are coming into your event. Or you can do something like what we do at schools, is we might give children tickets outside, and so we hand out to everybody in the queue, and then they hand back to us as they come through the door. And what we like about that with children is that it's, even though they're getting this experience for free, they are going through that process of getting a ticket and then having to give that ticket in order to come into the event. So it also brings them a sense of ownership, that they understand that there's a value to be had in this experience. So there are different ways to determine numbers. Qualitative is all the descriptive kinds of information. It is subjective and it is open to interpretation. And the very same workshop can be wonderful for one person and can be terrible for another person. If someone had done an entire master's degree on monitoring and evaluation before they came to this morning's meeting, maybe they would find what we're saying very, very boring, because they know it all already. So it obviously is so dependent on where the person is coming from as to how they experience something. And it's asking questions like, how is this working? Why is it working? What did it make you feel? What was the impact for you? And very often we will ask people to self-report, or we will use observation. So we'll, for example, look around and see how much energy there is in the room. Are people engaged, or are people sitting on their phones on the side, not interested in what we're doing? And then interviews, as Tateng was talking about earlier. And through that kind of qualitative assessment, we can start to uncover trends and opinions, and we can see, what problems might be. We might get someone whose reason for not enjoying something or not getting much out of something is really valid, and that makes us rethink how we're doing the workshops and how we need to adapt, or how else we might need to change our program. And they can also be analyzed by grouping them into meaningful themes or categories. So one of the things that you're doing when you're assessing qualitative data is you're looking at, what are the themes that are coming out of all of this qualitative data? What are people feeling in general? Can we put some names to that? Maybe some other sort of concrete questions to ask is, who's doing the monitoring? So it could be the individual is they self-monitoring, or we're doing the monitoring, observing of them, or interviewing them, or we've got a third party who is doing the monitoring, or who is at least validating our findings. So on very big projects, it can be useful to have a third party evaluation. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the material that we used when we were doing our very, very big ASSITEJ World Congress in 2017, which was a huge project, and which we required to get a third-party, research team involved in. So we did a lot of our own monitoring and evaluation, and we came up with a very full report. But we also got people to look at it very objectively from the outside. And I think that's very important, particularly if you are spending a lot of money, so that you can justify what the benefit is of the work that you're doing. And then, of course, it's the types of monitoring tools. How do they monitor? And Ntuteng has spoken to some of these things already. And I'm going to give you some examples of these in a sec. And then lastly, then we would pull those together in different ways. We would analyze them maybe statistically or qualitatively. We would be writing reports and we're presenting them in different formats. So I'm going to show you now some examples of presentation of these kinds of material and also some examples of tools. One thing before we leave the slide, though, which I think is really important to remember, is we are creatives. Our monitoring and evaluation can be creative too. It doesn't have to be only charts and, you know, infographics and Excel spreadsheets and that kind of thing. It could be a photo essay. It could be a video interview. It could be a podcast. It could be a social media review, you know. And there's so many different ways that monitoring and evaluation can happen. And actually, when you start to get creative about the monitoring and evaluation, and it's fun to do, it also adds value to both your project and to the organization as a whole. So I'm going to stop sharing this one now. So here you can see something about the scope of the event. It was an 11-day international theatre festival with 63 productions, 464 artists, productions from 32 countries. There was a 4-day meeting of the International Association of ASSITEJ. 4 international networks held their meeting. There were official representatives from over 54 countries. There were 12 special events, including an opening ceremony, an Africa Day, award ceremonies, closing ceremonies, and a whole lot of social events. And then there was a conference which took place over 10 days, 2 days academic conference and 8 days of thematic kind of conferences and workshops, with 69 paper presentations, 8 focus days, 126 symposiums, workshops, discussions, 209 presenters. So you can see from that, that is quantitative, right? That is a description of the event in terms of the numbers. But on the same page, what you'll see are some of the responses. So here we've got Gladys Agalis saying the most amazing possibilities of exchange, the vigorous debates and discussions, observing, looking inward and deeply assessing one's own work, learning give and take, connecting with young and old. So in other words, we are, in our reporting, we are giving you both the quantitative and the qualitative on one page. Here you can start to see how those 63 productions that were spoken about in the previous slide were spread across South African productions, international and South African collaborative productions, non-African international productions, and African productions, non-South African, African productions and collaborations. So again, sort of visuals just to show some of these infographics. And here you can see, this is an attendance slide. So this is showing that over 21,000 people attended with individual tickets. 18,562 of those tickets were sold through CompuTicket. And then there were children who were coming in who were sponsored, 2,859 were sponsored, etc. So this slide is all about attendance. I'm going to skip through some of the other slides that give you some more of that kind of information to just show you something which I think is very valuable for arts organizations as a whole. So when we were thinking about our monitoring and evaluation, we knew we were going to get a number of international delegates to this conference. In the end, we had, I think, 1,000, just short of 1,400 delegates from all over the world and all over South Africa. And we wanted to find out how they experienced the event. And we were looking at what questions to ask. And so we did some research and we discovered that Arts Council Australia had developed a platform called Culture Counts, which has a number of different broad questions that you can ask of your audiences. And we then selected the 10 questions that we felt were most relevant to our particular event. So for example, you're seeing 4 of the questions here. Concept, it was an interesting idea. And you can see down at the bottom on the left there that the majority of people thought it was a very interesting idea. So the scale was on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it was 1 to 7 scale, 7 being the most and 1 being the least. And then the presentation, it was well produced and presented. Distinctiveness, it was different from things I've experienced before. Challenge, it was thought-provoking. And then over the page, captivation, it was absorbing and it held my attention. Enthusiasm, I'd like to come to something like this again. Local impact, it's important that it's happening here. Relevance, it is something to say about the world in which we live. Rigor, it's well thought through and put together. Authenticity, it was authentic and engaging within its context. We found these questions really helpful because they gave us a kind of a broad scope that we could use. But what it meant was that we could compare our event to other similar events that had been monitored and evaluated using these same questions in other parts of the world. And we could see that we were doing really well in terms of the responses that we were getting from these questions. And then just to show you an example of a completely creative way of monitoring and evaluating, one of the things that had happened during the event was that we asked artists who were participating to contribute to a communal poem. So we had 62 artists from 30 countries writing in 22 languages, and they all wrote a couple of lines or a verse or a something, and that was all gathered. And you can actually go and see the whole epic poem. It became the Cradle of Creativity poem, but it also became a beautiful way of having a qualitative response to the event. So I'll just read you one, just as an example, because the writing might be quite small on your side. So this is from Lereko Rex Mofono. He is an ASSITEJ member, a playwright. He's done a lot of work with ASSITEJ, developing new work for particularly the 10 to 14-year-old age group. I am a witness. Many countries gathering around a bonfire. They tell stories of hope, peace, friendship, love. I take a greater look at these countries and see children gathered at the southern tip of Africa, children united, children of one voice. They sing and keep on singing. Now, something like that is really beautiful and moving. And through that, you feel the energy of the event, right? You feel how it was impacting on this particular person because they felt moved to write in this way. So monitoring and evaluation doesn't have to just be dry. It can really be creative and interesting in terms of how you collect it and the tools that you use. I'm going to stop showing this. So we can't always design these very beautifully designed reports because you don't always have the the capacity or the budget, right? And I know on Friday everybody was so impressed by Suidoosterfees' beautiful graphic design report. And I think what I'm about to show you now is probably more like what the majority of us do the majority of the time, right? We kind of make do with basically a Word document and some graphics. So here we've got a report which is more kind of typical. It's not beautifully designed. It's just giving the basics. But this is it's a report for our family festival. So one of the things that we've done at the National Arts Festival over the last many years, obviously not the last couple of years with COVID, but prior to that, is have an ASSITEJ family either venue or platform where productions come together. So this is a report about how that went. And here you can see the productions, the list of productions that were on in that year. And you can read something about them and you can see the timeline. And then it looks at the measuring the expected results. So everything which we had said we wanted to do in the original report, we put in here as an expected result. And then we spoke back to it, right? So we said, had we achieved that particular result or not? And so one of the things that we found, for example, is that our overall, we wanted to achieve a 40% attendance rate at National Arts Festival on the Fringe, which isn't great, but it's, you know, that was our sort of benchmark. And we managed to achieve a 39.9% average across all the productions. But you can see that some productions were particularly well attended, like True Confusion and Incredible Journey and Red Earth Revisited. And other productions were less well attended. So there was a big discrepancy between the attendance for different productions, and we wanted to understand why some productions did so well and others did less well. We also looked at ticket sales. So here you can see the tickets that were sold, the capacity of that particular venue, and then the attendance, the percentage attendance according to that. So, you know, so like Fishy Flippers, for example, had a 61% or 62% attendance rate, which was high comparatively for that production, while some other productions really struggled. We looked at what the marketing was, so we listed all the marketing examples, the direct marketing. Also, we had all the publicity. So here's a list of all the publicity links and the reviews, etc. And then what I want to go to here, because I find it such a very useful tool, is that everything was linked in terms of audience feedback, was linked into basically Google Forms. And we were then able to create little graphics. So here you can see the numbers of tickets that were issued and sold. And if we move further down, we'll start to see some of the, sorry, I'm just moving through these quickly. We'll also start to see some of the responses. Here we go. So we wanted to find out about the audience. Who was coming to the National Arts Festival? What ages were coming to see the shows that we were putting on? Where were they coming from in the country? And here we can see the data that we collected through audience feedback forms. Now, these feedback forms were in fact at that point paper-based, and we then captured them afterwards using Google Forms because that was easier for us at the time. Now I would, as far as possible, to directly input onto Google Forms if you can. You will have noticed that the feedback that we're asking you to do for these workshops is on Google Forms. And if you set up the Google form right, it's generally very easy to do on a cell phone. You know, you just click on the link, and if you have a couple of choices that you ask people to make, so you're not asking them to write too much information, you can generally get the basic information that you need, and then maybe you give them a couple of sentences that, you know, those kinds of questions later on. But that is doable on a phone. And it's much easier, obviously, because then all the material comes directly to the back end on your computer, and you've got it already, you know, in your system. So here you can see an audience breakdown in terms of ages. You can hear about how they heard about the show. So we can see here that 53.3% heard about the show through posters or booklets, which was fantastic because we put quite a lot of money that year, I remember, into the booklets. And we had these beautiful booklets which were given to children, and they had games inside them that they could use. And we weren't sure if the booklets were working. And this monitoring and evaluation helped us to say, yes, the booklets work. All right, people definitely are coming to see the show because of the booklets. And then how did you enjoy the show? And they had just 4 options. They loved it. It was good. It was boring. It was, it was good. It was okay. And it was boring. And thankfully, the majority of those answers is I loved it and it was good. And then a smaller percentage for it was okay and it was boring. And then how often do you see plays? We wanted to know how often people went to the theatre. So we asked them that question. And almost 50% of the audience answered not sure. Which is interesting. I'll sort of aggregate it, about less than 30% said once a month or once a week. And 22% said once a year. So, you know, we realized that there were a lot of people who weren't seeing a lot of theatre. And then we asked them where they were coming from. And we broke that down into provinces, and we were able to see that the majority of people were in fact coming from the Eastern Cape, and then from Gauteng, and then from the Western Cape. So, you know, all of this was really important. It wasn't just for a funder. In fact, there wasn't really a funder for that particular year. We had smaller funders who were supporting individual productions, but there wasn't a kind of an ASSITEJ funder. But for us, doing this project year after year, it gave us a lot of really important information about where we should be marketing more, what kind of marketing we should be doing, and how people were responding to the work that we were doing. And it helped us to think through some of what we needed to think through in order to make the project more successful. I want to give you one more example of a tool, a different kind of tool, because I think it's quite interesting. And I also want to just celebrate something for a moment, because last night, the Fleur de Cups happened. These are the Western Cape Theatre Awards. And we were delighted that Magnet Theatre won the award for innovation for their early years work. Now, early years is something that ASSITEJ South Africa has been championing in South Africa since we started. And Magnet has been a partner with us on that journey. And we were very much part of the process of introducing them to international practitioners and, developing the work in the early days. And so it was absolutely fantastic to see that Magnet Theatre had won last night. So I wanted to show you just a little bit of the form that we use when we collected information about the early years project. Beautiful. So this is a form that the actors would need to do after a performance. So they would write the name of themselves, the school that they were going to, or the creche, and the date. And then there's a little monitoring and evaluation checklist there for the touring group. Take a photo of each school or venue, preferably one that identifies the school. So, for example, you sit yourselves down in front of the name of the school and you take a photograph of that. Photograph of the children at each performance, either watching the show or afterwards. Give the teachers the post-performance questionnaire before the show, okay? And so that's a separate questionnaire. Ask them if they're unsure about anything, and then have one actor per performance fill in this post-performance questionnaire after the show. So those were the instructions to the touring team. And this was a Magnet team that was going into creches in townships all over the Western Cape. Now, this is from the actor's perspective, right? So how would you rate this performance from 1 to 10? Right? So like, did you feel it was a great show today, or it was we were a bit low on energy, or we arrived late and we were quite flustered, and so what sort of a show was it from your point of view? Describe your feelings about this show, the specific performance, in a sentence. Was the content of the play accessible and appealing to the children? Please comment. What did you find most interesting or surprising about the children's response? So, for example, it might be something like they laughed at this particular moment. No one's ever laughed at that before. Or they got really excited by the water moment in our show, we were interested by that, or whatever it is. Then were there any specific challenges to this particular performance? So it could be space, environment, teacher receptiveness, logistics, children's responses, other actors, okay? Any kind of challenges that you experienced. Now, this is the part that I think is particularly interesting for you to be aware of. These shows were going to children who were younger than 6, right? So you can't sit down with a child who's 3 and say to them, what did you think about the show? What did you feel at this moment? Did you find it boring? I mean, you could have a very long conversation with a 3-year-old about that, but you're not going to get very far doing that with a whole group of 3-year-olds, right? When you're working with very young children, we need to observe them. And we need to be looking for certain things, certain clues in the way they are watching and engaging, which gives us feedback about how engaged they actually are. So we asked the actors to become aware of what these clues were. So are the children watching, tracking, and cued into what is going on? So tracking means, like, if a person crosses from left to right, do the children's eyes follow that person, right? Are they really focused on what's happening on the stage in any moment? Then, intense attention for a period and ignores any distractions. Do you feel like that's a description of what you're seeing with the children? Are they really focused? Are they ignoring any distractions? Are they watching and reciprocating through repeating or copying what they see? So with very young children, you might see them in the audience. They are smiling when something's funny, or they are stretching when the actor's stretching, or they might even move a little bit because they're seeing the actors moving in a particular way. So there may be some body language which is happening. Are they demonstrating positive body language, following verbal and or non-verbal narratives, and smiling or reaching or nodding? So, for example, did you notice at that moment in the play that they were all nodding because they knew what actor was saying or what the character was saying then, you know, or those typical moments that often happen in a children's theatre production, you know, where is he? Where is he? And they're all going, there. Okay. So that would be an example of there's positive body language, there's verbal response. Are they physically responding and doing in two-way exchange with one another? So, for example, hey, look at that, you know, that sense of kind of connecting to the people around them and then to the stage. Do what they do provoke action in others through either what they're doing or through some sort of vocalization? So one child starts to laugh, everybody starts to laugh. Or one child starts to cry and everybody starts to cry. That's sort of the actor's nightmare with early years theatre, but it can happen, right? Because children are very sensitive and very empathetic, and they hear another child crying and they may start to cry themselves. And then do children take individual action with materials or props or instruments or space? So in other words, sometimes at the end of a performance, you might invite the children to come and play with the props that have been used in the performance. Or you might, or they might themselves just naturally want to crawl into the space to feel the cushions or to touch the sand or whatever it is that is being used in the space. So this was the kind of thing that we wanted the actors to notice. And we wanted them then to say this never happened, or it occasionally happened, or it regularly happened, or it often happened, or it happened all the time, and to give some indication of numbers. So we were really asking the actors to be aware of their audience. And then they could give us any other comments. Now, this, as a feedback tool, was absolutely vital to the development of the early years work, because we could then start to see what the patterns were, where the mistakes were, or where things weren't connecting with audiences and how to maybe shift them and change them. And the actors also got really good at reading the room, reading the audience, understanding the audience. And in that way, you know, getting a better understanding of whether their work is actually translating to the audience or not. So monitoring and evaluation is not just about what the funder needs to know at the end. For me, what's really vital is it's about what you need to know, what your organization needs to know about the work that you're doing and how effective you are being or not. Maybe one last example, just to have a different style of audience feedback form. This is a different one, which is for children to do. So this is one which would be given to learners or to teachers. And here we might collect name and surname and grade and school, etc. Or we may decide not to collect that information at this point. So, you know, one of the things that we also need to think about, and which we haven't mentioned at all, but I think is really important to bear in mind, is POPI, the Protection of Personal Information Act. And we need to be careful about the kind of information that we are collecting. So pre-POPI, this kind of feedback form would have been fine, but we would need to make certain that we had permission to get this sort of information. In other words, to attach the name and the child's demographics to the particular response that they are giving. Sometimes that, you know, you get the permission and that's absolutely fine. But if you don't get the permission, you need to find a way then to kind of make the work anonymous, essentially, you know, so that you get the feedback, but you don't necessarily know, you're not able to attribute it to a particular individual. But in this one, we're asking them 10 questions, and the questions have only one of 3 answers. Not at all, a little bit, very much. And so we did that sort of 3 options with little graphics. So you've got a sad face, a kind of a neutral face, and a smiley face, right? And the kids can just circle the one that they think is appropriate for the question. So how much were you looking forward to the performance? And maybe they didn't even know it was happening, so they just do a neutral face. Or maybe they'd heard about it 2 weeks ago and they were really looking forward to, you know, then they'd do the smiley face. So it was asking simple questions, but with just a very simple combination of potential answers. And then one space for them to say anything they wanted to say about the play. So they could write a word or a sentence or a phrase And obviously some kids might write more and others might not write at all. But that's just another example of information from an audience. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and let me put myself back on camera and just see whether there are any questions or any comments from anybody on some of the tools that we've been sharing with you. Any questions or comments that you'd like to share?
Hi, Fet, is Mohammed here. I think this was very helpful, especially for when hosting events, to have a feedback form from people to know what they think about the event and how the event was. Very, very helpful. For me, this is new things, so I'm learning. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mohammed. Yeah, that's great.
Hi, Yvette. It's Mary Fora.
Yes.
How do you find the compliance for online questionnaires? If it's kind of 10 or 15, 30, 100%?
So, you know, generally speaking, you're always going to be looking at a sample, and a 10% sample is sufficient to give you an indication of what you know, of how it's being read. And so I would say that anything over 10% is you know, exceptionally well. Obviously, it does depend on the scope of the project. You know, in a project like Cradle of Creativity, where we had, you know, as you saw, you know, a huge number of ticket goers and then a huge number of delegates, 10% was about as much feedback as we were able to manage. And we did have the external evaluator as well, who did a separate kind of evaluation. And so combined, we were able to probably reach more than that. But then, you know, your project might be very different from that. It might be something which is far more one on, say, 20 people in a workshop, in which case it's very possible to get feedback from 100% of that workshop. In fact, I would encourage you to do that because you really want to hear how people are responding to the work that you're sharing with them. And you can make it a part of the process of the workshop itself. So rather than sending it to them afterwards, you know, ideally get them to do it right there and then at the end. And I think with online, we've seen a lot of this happening now, that as people, for example, attend an online workshop or conference or whatever, they're getting the feedback form as the last thing that happens in the engagement. But even if it's a physical event, you know, have the evaluation forms ready right there, you know, give them a little time to do it, find a fun way of, you know, put some music on or whatever it is, you know, find a fun way of dealing with that moment, but make it a part of what you're doing, because then you will get the information that you need, and it will really help you to move with developing the program.
Terrific. Many thanks.
Yvette, I have a participant here in the CDI who's got a question for you.
Yes.
Hi, it's not a question, it's a comment. I just wanted to say your presentation. Oh, your presentation is very informative and helpful. Study the cradle of creativity. I'm interested to learn more about that from you, and I hope the coaching session will be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great to hear. Yeah, you know, I certainly am not maybe in this forum, but I'd be very happy to share with you more about Cradle of Creativity. And what I can tell you just in brief is that the event, the original event was in 2017, but as part of our strategy coming out of that event, after all that monitoring and evaluation that we realized that it made such a tremendous impact on the theatre community and the audience community that we wanted to do it again. So in fact, ASSITEJ then committed to a biennial Cradle of Creativity. And in 2019, we held a Cradle of Creativity at Baxter Theatre. It wasn't as big as the original one. It was, you know, something like 30 productions as opposed to 63, but it was still a pretty big festival, and it was at the Baxter and Magnet Theatre and Theatre Arts and Gugastebe. And we had hoped to do it again in 21, but of course, COVID. And so what we've been doing over COVID is we've had something called Cradle Rewired, which is a series of online engagements which have had certain elements of the original Cradle of Creativity and opportunities for people to collaborate both internationally and locally. And we're hoping to be back with Cradle of Creativity in 2023 in Gauteng. We are in a partnership with the Market Theatre around that. So yeah, that's just a little brief overview, but we can always talk more about that. Are there any other questions or comments?
So Yvette, it's just a comment from my side to say thanks very much for also encouraging all of us to just think about M&E as part of the activities that we do. It shouldn't be something separate. It just becomes part of what we do, because I think so many of us are intimidated by M&E. We're intimidated by the time it can take. We're intimidated by having a sense that we don't really have the right expertise. But at a very simple level, we're all able to track the impact that our work has on our audiences. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Fran. So what I would like for us to do now, and I think, Ntateng, perhaps if you could facilitate the online conversation with everybody who's in the room, and I'm going to turn off our mics here in ASSITEJ, in Vrygrond, and Fran, if you want to maybe turn off your mic and just chat to the people that you're with at CDI. We're going to give a little bit of time for you to think about your own projects. So think about maybe specifically the project that you applied to the National Arts Council with, right? Or if you haven't applied to the National Arts Council yet, maybe a project that you would apply to the National Arts Council with. And can you think about what are the tools that you would use to monitor and evaluate this project? What are the kinds of strategies that you would use? You know, thinking about the forms that I've showed you, thinking about some of the other examples that we haven't maybe gone into in as much detail, like interviews or whatever. You know, what do you think might work for your project? And remember also that particularly if we're thinking about National Arts Council funding, we want to make sure that the indicators that we select are linked back to the National Arts Council's overall goals. Right, so you know that they have these areas that they're looking at around social cohesion and transformation and inclusion and you know other aspects like that. So are there ways that you could measure those aspects specifically in your project? Because if you can indicate that you're going to do that and then do it successfully, you're going to obviously have a much stronger project and one that hopefully the National Arts Council will then want to fund again in the future, right? Because you've demonstrated that you really have created the value that they were hoping you would through the funding that you've given them, that they've given you. So that's the task, and we're going to give just 15 minutes for a little bit of a conversation. So there'll be an online conversation, and there'll be an in-the-room conversation, and then we'll come back together at, let's say, 10 past 12, if that works for everybody.
Hi everyone, so I hope you can hear me well. I think the task is clear. Yvette said that we just need to discuss if we have applied for the NSC funding or if we are currently receiving funds, what kind of tools would you use, or maybe what kind of tools are you using at the moment to monitor and evaluate your project. So I'm not sure how we're going to do this. Are we going to talk, or do people want to type on the chat box?
Hello guys. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. It's Mpundo.
I'm Fundo.
Everyone can hear me, I think so.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. The question, I think, or the kind of session is based on how we write our proposals, or what kind of proposals did we kind of write for NSC? I'm just posing that. I don't know whether it's a question, but I just want to ask that.
Tateng, do you have any
Are you
feedback?
asking if the task?
Yes.
Yes. So Are you asking what the task is at the moment?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the task is, if you are running projects or if you are currently getting any funding from the National Arts Council, or you want to apply for funding, what kind of monitoring and evaluation tools would you use to monitor your project? Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you. That it's monitoring tools. Thank you. That's the way that I was looking at it.
Yes, it's monitoring tools, yes. I see Chantel's hand is up. Is it now or with an old hand?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is if we've done projects and then around the monitoring and evaluation tools. Yes, I've started youth theatre in my hometown last year, and I've applied to NAC, and actually I received a response from NAC on Friday while we were sitting in the workshop to say that the application was unsuccessful, but it was because I was short of one reference letter, and at the time my SARS tax fund, I was busy sorting out stuff around that, and they take very long. It's still not sorted. So now I don't know whether the proposal that I've submitted was adequate, and it was just those two issues. And then in terms of the monitoring and evaluation tools, I use the same approach that you guys are using. So like the log frame and all of that, but there's certain elements in the presentation that you've done today that I'm going to add in future, because I am going to do another youth theatre this year, like where I invite uh, uh, proposals for plays. It's something similar to what you've done with that conference, the global one where people from all over the world participated. So yeah, the monitoring and evaluation, I'm using similar tools like the questionnaires and the photos and all of that, but I haven't visualized the data yet.
Thank you so much, Chantel. And are you having any challenges? Like, would you say that what you are using, what are some of the good things, or what are some of the challenges that you would want to fix going forward?
Oh, the challenges that I want to fix going forward is to the stakeholders involved and the participants needs to be briefed more about the governance of the whole project, because that is something that I had to run on my own, because I didn't have enough, I didn't have a team to do that. So I need to equip myself and to empower and capacitate myself with a team that is capable of taking those things out of my hand, because I was like busy producing, doing logistics, running around. I only had one person who was the creative director who took ownership of the play. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chantel. That makes sense. Thanks. I see a hand. Is just real.
Yeah, hello, hi everyone. No, I just wanted to say the evaluation tools that we also use is similar to what everyone has been saying, and also weekly reports just to see. And in addition, we do short video clips of the project where we like put key information in the video clip just to also make sure how we've improved with regards to the previous one. And that questionnaire would be something we definitely do at the next event, because then you get relevant answers. Another thing I wanted to ask was, when you apply for funding at the National Art Council, which I did and I was successful, I think it was 2020, yeah. And again, I want to apply, but I'm kind of like in the dark when it comes to applying. What happens when you're not successful and the NEC does not communicate with you? What happens then to your proposal or to your plan? And what happens the next time that you must apply, because you totally in the dark with regards to why didn't you get the funding? That's the first question. And another thing is that I've observed was when we get the funding from the National Art Council, yes, we do report, but what I would like to see is that consistent involvement from the National Arts Council with regards to what we're doing in terms of maybe putting our projects also on your platforms from your side as part of the evaluation process, so others out there can also see, no, but we've got just real or someone from the Karoo that has been funded, because most times those stories don't get out there. Our project is not spoken about on your platforms, so others in rural areas can also be motivated and inspired to know about the National Art Council did fund someone in the rural area. And then also in terms of when we do projects, their involvement to also maybe send a representative to speak about the projects of the NEC, or have your logo on our event, or have you speak about our project. That will really boost also our projects coming from rural areas. So that's basically what I wanted to add, and also what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jezreel. I am unable to answer questions for the National Arts Council. Is there anyone who has more information about what happens if your proposal was not successful and there is no communication?
Puleng, are you still on? Is there any feedback that you can give from your side?
Hello, can I get the question again? Hello?
So the question from Jezreel, Puleng, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. I think the question from Jezreel that I heard, and Jezreel, you can correct me, was that what happens when you have applied to the NEC for funding and then you are told that it's not successful, but you do not have any further information on why it was not successful. And I think the other one was about funding projects that are running in rural areas, whether that happens or not. And just so you can correct me.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask.
Okay.
For
in a case
what?
where, sorry, my connection is actually bad, but I'll try my best. In a case where you applied and you don't get further reasons why your application was declined, you need to then communicate with the official who sent you the letter, the declined letter, stating the reasons why your application is declined. Unless if your declined is based on budgetary constraint, because that's also another reason that your application will be declined.
Yeah, and my other question was, when being funded by the National Art Council, what's the possibility of them being more involved? Yes, like last time when I got the funding, I only reported, but more involved, I mean by they partner with us on as we rolling out projects, they also involved, they part of, obviously not all of the projects that we are doing, but now and then it will be good to know, okay, the National Art Council is part of this project we're doing, for instance, in Beaufort West or in a small town like Maritzburg. You see, that also inspires a lot of rural artists and entities to see, yo, but I mean, if they can partner with the National Art Council, not just in terms of funding, but physically being involved and also putting our projects on your social platforms as also a way of inspiring rural artists applying or rural artists that want to reach out to the National Art Council.
Oh, okay. In terms of involvement of the National Arts Council, you need to communicate with the official who's responsible for your project. And I don't know in terms of partnership, because once we have a contract with you, it's a form of partnership already. If you want any further involvement in terms of us coming to view your project or monitor your project, or even come to visit one of the plays or whatever that you'll be hosting, we will definitely be there to assist. But in terms of partnerships, apart from giving you funds, we don't have anything in place now. But I want you guys to be on the lookout for the next couple of months. We're going to have series of calls for different various funding, so which will also include a bit of partnership there.
Thanks, ma'am. Yeah, it's very clear covered. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Puleng. I see that there are some charts. Our aim is to, this is Hedwig, our aim is to collect and assess 1,000 individuals with child CDATs between 2021 and 2023. Hedwig, do you mind just explaining to us what are these? What do you mean by CDATs?
Oh, yes, yeah, I can explain. So we're trying to, CDAT stands for Child Development Assessment Tools. And those CDATs, we monitor the stability of children that participate in our art sessions. And we measure their general, emotional, creative, and social interaction abilities through this tool. Yeah, so generally speaking, that's what we do.
Yes. Thank you. That's good to know. I see Anna Paula Little says we use a participatory methodology in our M&E, e.g. art facilitators and learners are able to speak, draw, and act how they feel about the program, artworks, photos, and videos. All right. No, thank you, Anna, because when you said that artists were able to speak, draw, and act, I just wanted to check how do you then take that information and put it together into something that you can later be able to evaluate.
Oh, hello.
Saying a little bit
Hi.
Yes.
It's me. Hello. Thanks for that. Now, what we do, we then we collect all of that information. If it's if they do it in a short play, we document that and we collect everything they've done, and then we take that away and analyze that and look at the general feeling about certain things that we've done in the program. If there's been changes, if a child is feeling more secure, if they're feeling more confident at school, perhaps they're not missing as much school as they were. We use all of that, working with people who work with special needs children as well, who help us on that social side, and then we use that towards looking at building the program and improving it.
Yes.
There's a lot of. I've only done that step, but there are a lot of steps to the collection and the analysis of it as well. Yeah. We just feel that makes it
thank you so
that people then get a chance to express how they feel about what they're doing, and then everyone gets a voice. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that makes sense. Thank you so much. I see that we are it's 11 minutes past 12. And we're supposed to go back. I think I'll just check with Yvette if now we're going back to the main room. Thank you. I've just noted down some of your responses. And when we go back to the with everyone else back, I think we will just need to debrief a little bit about what we discussed in this sort of breakaway session. So feel free to do share what you said if you want to. So I'll just check with Yvette now so we can. Yes.
Thanks, Ntateng. It sounds like you've had a good conversation, and I see lots of interesting things in the chat here.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, thanks. Over to you, Yvette.
Thank you. I just want to check whether Fran's back, whether they've unmuted themselves or back in the room, or whether they're still busy with their conversation on that side. Could I ask one of the partners, maybe Taryn, if you could just reach out to Fran and just find out whether they are back in the room?
I'll do that.
Great, thanks so much. So we also had some interesting conversations here, and something that came up, which I thought was two things actually, which I thought that I would like to share with everybody. I think one of the things that is really vital with your monitoring and evaluation is to check up front what the funder is going to require. So often time is wasted and energy is wasted because you forgot to collect something that you really needed to collect, and you could have collected if you just remembered it up front, you know. So I'll give you an example. With the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, for example, they will very often need you to provide the ID numbers of the beneficiaries who've been part of workshops, and they'll need to have a register where there's an actual physical signature on the register. Now, it's great if you've set that up, you know, ahead of time, and when people come into your workshop, they're signing that register, they're putting in their IDs. But if you remember that only after you've done the workshops, and now you've got to run around and try and collect people's signatures and ID numbers, it can be really time consuming. So, you know, just I would really stress this thing of it's part of the planning, is check your contracts, check the specific things that are being required by the funder, you know, on a very practical level, to make sure that you embed them in your practice. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that ASSITEJ is part of a consortium of organizations, or a sort of alliance of organizations, NGOs that work in the education sector. And obviously we work from the arts perspective in the education sector. And this alliance is called NASCI. And there was a recent NASCI session where they were sharing different M&E processes. And one of the things which I found really exciting and useful, and I will certainly be finding out more about and hope to be able to share with all of you, is a new tool which has been developed by one of the NGOs, and it's called TeamPact. And it seems to me to be a really great tool for using for monitoring any kind of workshop situation, whether it's with children or with adults. It's basically an attendance register that happens through a photograph. So what happens is that you first of all take individual photographs of each person and create their individual profiles if they're going to be attending workshops with you regularly. And then at the start of a session, you take a photograph. And at the end of the session, the same session, you take a photograph. And obviously that's time stamped, so we know that it is genuine. It happened on that day. That was the beginning, that was the end of the workshop. And it matches the faces through facial recognition to your database. So it automatically pulls up an attendance register without you having to create one. And these kinds of online tools, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of them. And I'd really encourage you to explore what's out there and to identify the kinds of tools that could make your life easier, because there's nothing worse than running around with, you know, files of papers that you can't deal with because there are just so many of them and you never use the information in them because it's just too much for you to actually handle. So, you know, the easiest way of collecting data is what you need to be looking for, you know, and that will be specific to your context. Do you have Wi-Fi where you are working, for example, or is a photograph something that you can take easily on your phone or not, you know? So definitely you want to tailor it to your context. Ntateng, I don't know whether you want to just share any points coming out of your discussion, or invite anybody to share anything with the larger group.
Yeah, I can say a few things that I noted down, and anyone can really add. I think what we spoke about, we realized that people are already sort of using the same kinds of tools that we shared today. I had people talking about log frames. I had people talking about the questionnaires. And then some spoke about short video clips of the project. And I think the first one that I had today for me was the Child Development Assessment Tool, which is a qualitative tool. And and Hedwig, if you don't mind, you can explain further what is that and how it works. And then we also spoke about how they use speaking, drawing, acting out of the participants' journeys. artworks, photos, videos, registers, games, and observations. So those were some of the things that we spoke about. And then there was a little bit of about how I remember someone said that there are things that they would still want to improve in the M&E systems, like for example, making sure that there's stakeholders are involved when they do M&E, and that the governance of the entire project is shared and like everyone is informed about how it works, and also to just increase a team that can be able to focus on M&E.
Thank you. I'm seeing also in the chat some lovely examples from Anna Paula Little around participatory methodologies in M&E, and that's also something that we in ASSITEJ do a lot, but that's wonderful, you know, sort of allowing people to use creative processes to reflect on their engagement. Fran, do you want to introduce anything from your group?
Sorry, Yvette, to take a while to link back again. We were just having some good conversations about very basic tools of counting. And we were also talking about the basic need for counting and having numbers for impact, which impact shows an organization's credibility. It shows what you've done, which enhances your ability to ask for funding. So nothing specific to add, but we just valued the opportunity to have that conversation. Does anyone else want to add to what I've said? No. No? No? Okay. Thanks, Yvette.
Thanks, Fran. So I think we are now at 20 past 12. We've got 10 minutes left of this session before we due to have a half an hour lunch break. Are there any questions or comments or anything that you would like to ask about that we haven't dealt with? Perhaps questions specific to the National Arts Council monitoring and evaluation. Maybe Puleng, you have some observations on what you've heard today and would like to say something about, you know, what you think would be particularly important from an NAC perspective.
Now, Yvette, you're really trying to expose me that we actually do not have competent systems for monitoring and evaluation compared to what you presented today. Because I was actually showing the CEO was in my office. I was like, come and see the monitoring and evaluation, which was presented here. This was fantastic for me to actually go through. And Thabiseng as well did a very good job in terms of explaining, in terms of targets as well. So we're definitely going to steal some of the ideas from you. We are also developing a policy on monitoring and evaluation. So we will definitely, when we run workshops, we will also explain to people how we do our own monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Puleng. I'm seeing a comment from Hedvig. At the beginning of the school term, we fill in a baseline rating for each child, and at the end of the term, we rate them all again. This enables us to compare pre and post intervention and informs us if the art classes we did with the children made a positive change, if it had impact. I think Hedvig's with Butterfly Art. So yeah, that's a great example of, you know, getting the baseline and then getting a response at the end, so you can see that change. And that links directly back to that whole idea of what is the social impact? You know, what is the social impact of the work that you can do, the work that you're doing, and can you actually prove that the work that you're doing has social impact? As artists, we so often will say these grand things about the work that we do, you know, oh, it makes people more creative and it makes them more this and that, but do we really know it? and how do we know it, you know? It was one of the things that ASSITEJ put a lot of energy into doing with our Kickstarter program, which is our arts education program, which is now a partner to the Department of Basic Education. So we are the official delivery partner for creative arts in schools. And what we did with that was we did a pilot where precisely similar to what Hedvig is talking about, but it went even further. It was a kind of a 360 degree. So it was interviewing principals as to how the the arts featured within the school, what they felt about the arts at the beginning of the process, interviewing the creative arts HODs, interviewing the creative arts teachers, finding out how much experience they had, what they felt about the creative arts, what their struggles were or what their positives were, working with the children, seeing where they were at, and then over a 2-year period, monitoring and evaluating against the program as we were implementing the program in schools, what the change was. And at the end of that 2-year period, with that monitoring and evaluation, we were able to then write up some really significant reports which helped us to get more funding for that program and for us to start to think longer term. So we were able to go from a 2-year program to a 3-year program, and now we're at the beginning of a 5-year upscale. So really, getting your monitoring and evaluation right can be key to the success and the sustainability of your organization. It can be what makes the big difference between whether you or not you get funding in the future. So I would really really encourage you to consider it very seriously and make it a part of your practice as much as possible. I think we are pretty much done for now. Thanks very much, everybody.